Hi, third grade. So this week, instead of doing Edgenuity lessons, we are going to be reading some chapters from the 10 True Tales, Heroes of 9/11. Patriot Day is on Friday, September 11th. And so the class here with Mrs. Myers and Mrs. Collins, they are reading some of the chapters. And I thought that it would be more interesting and more fun to share these chapters with you and have you take a short quiz for your grade this week. So I will be reading chapter 1 today. That's called Attack on America, and this is going to give you some background about what 9/11 is. So chapter 1, Attack on America. On September 11th, 2001, the United States and the world changed forever. In the bloodiest day on American soil since the Civil War, 19 members of the radical Islamic terrorist organization Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial jetliners and turned them into weapons of death and destruction. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 was deliberately crashed into the 110-story North Tower of World Trade Center in New York City. 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 plowed into the Twin South Tower. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 smashed into the Pentagon, the nation's military headquarters near Washington, D.C. A fourth hijacked jet, United Airlines Flight 93, was aiming for the U.S. Capitol or the White House, but the courageous passengers and the crew rebelled. At 10:02 a.m., during their desperate attempt to overpower the terrorists, the plane crashed in Pennsylvania, 20 minutes short of its intended target. By the end of the day, 2,995 people were dead, and the world was in shock. The plot to attack America was hatched by radical Muslim Khalid Sheikh Mohammed of Kuwait. It was approved by Al-Qaeda's leader, Osama bin Laden, whose terrorist organization was based in Afghanistan. Their hatred for the United States was, and still is, fueled by their opposition to America's foreign policies. Under Muhammad's guidance, 19 young Muslim fundamentalists spent 2 years training for the deadly mission. Many of them had visas allowing them to live in the United States and take flying lessons. Armed with smuggled knives and box cutters, the hijackers looked like ordinary passengers as they boarded the 4 jetliners. Once the planes were airborne, the terrorists took control of the aircrafts and coordinated suicide assaults. They chose coast-to-coast flights because those planes carried large amounts of fuel and would cause the biggest explosions on impact. The enemy targeted the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center in New York's financial district because the structures were mighty symbols of commerce, and an estimated 14,000 workers were in the towers when they were attacked. The first plane crashed into the north side of the North Tower, 1 World Trade Center, between the 93rd and 99th floors, setting the upper floors ablaze. Thousands of workers, including victims suffering from serious burns, began making an orderly evacuation down the building's 3 stairways. At impact, however, most of the tower's 99 elevators were rendered useless, trapping hundreds of people. Meanwhile, people in the South Tower, 2 World Trade Center, began leaving. At first, most everyone assumed this was a horrible accident, but then the second plane struck the South Tower between the 77th and 85th floors, igniting another colossal high-rise fire. That's when everyone realized that the United States was under attack. Office equipment, glass, and people were sucked out the windows and rained down on the streets below, along with parts of planes and other debris. An estimated 600 people were on the floors where the plane struck and were likely killed instantly. At least 1,500 workers survived the crashes, but were unable to escape the buildings because they were trapped above the impact areas. As the fires raged with no hope of rescue, an estimated 200 people leaped to their deaths rather than die from the flames. Thousands of firefighters in 200 units, half the fire department of New York City, and thousands of officers from the New York Police Department, as well as off-duty first responders, sped to the chaotic scene. Firefighters, many wearing more than 100 pounds of gear, and other rescuers rushed into the burning towers. They began the torturous climb up the stairs of New York's two tallest buildings, boldly trying to save anyone they could. Thousands were helped out safely. But the steel girders holding each floor began to soften from the heat of the flaming jet fuel until they could no longer bear the load. At 9:59 a.m., after burning for 56 minutes, the South Tower collapsed. 29 minutes later, the North Tower came crashing down. The astonishing, life-crushing, earth-shaking collapses killed almost everyone inside, workers and rescuers. Massive, powerful clouds of choking dust and pelting debris roared through the streets, engulfing thousands of people who had already fled the towers. The falling rubble destroyed or seriously damaged other buildings in the complex. The nearby 47-story office building 7 World Trade Center caught fire and collapsed later that afternoon. Miraculously, 20 people trapped inside the World Trade Center buildings were rescued after the collapses, but the World Trade Center attacks claimed the lives of 2,605 people, not including those on board the aircraft. Among the casualties, 411 heroic first responders who were still trying to rescue people when the towers came down. The Fire Department of New York lost 343 members, the most of any fire department in the history of firefighting. The Port Authority Police Department suffered the single greatest day loss of life in law enforcement history when 37 officers from every rank were killed. The New York Police Department bore law enforcement's second worst death toll that day with 23 casualties. An additional 8 emergency medical technicians, or EMTs, and paramedics from private emergency medical service units also died. While the Twin Towers were burning, the third hijacked plane swooped down and crashed into the west side of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The impact killed 125 persons, including 55 military personnel, and caused a fierce fire that caved in a wedge of the enormous building. After United Flight 93 was hijacked over western Pennsylvania, passengers and crew learned from onboard phone calls to loved ones about the World Trade Center and Pentagon attacks. Knowing the terrorists on board were on a suicide mission to destroy another national landmark, the captives rose up against them in a spontaneous rebellion that ended when the jetliner crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Like the 3 earlier hijacked planes, no one survived. The 4 doomed flights claimed the lives of 246 passengers and crew members, in addition to the 19 terrorists. Fearing more assaults, officials immediately shut down New York City's bridges, tunnels, and airports, as well as museums and major skyscrapers like the Empire State Building. Then the order went nationwide. The Sears Tower in Chicago was evacuated, as were colleges and museums. Disney World shut down. Major League Baseball canceled its games, and nuclear power plants went to top security status. The thousands of commercial and private planes that were still in the air were ordered to land at the nearest airport. The United States quickly determined that the perpetrators were from al-Qaeda. Leader Osama bin Laden and his fellow fanatics were based in Afghanistan, where they had set up a network of camps to train radicals to carry out terrorism in other parts of the world. That country was under control of the Taliban, a fundamentalist Islamic militia that had seized power in 1996. 9 days after the 9/11 attacks, the United States demanded that the Taliban turn over to the U.S. all the leaders of al-Qaeda, immediately close every terrorist training camp, and round up all of Afghanistan's terrorists and their supporters. The Taliban refused. So on October 7, 2001, the United States and several allies launched Operation Enduring Freedom and invaded Afghanistan. Within 3 months, coalition forces, spearheaded by the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, toppled the Taliban government, destroyed al-Qaeda training camps, and drove most of the militants into the Hindu Kush mountains bordering Pakistan. Mohammed was captured in 2003, and as of early 2011, awaits trial on nearly 3,000 murder charges. Although many of al-Qaeda's top leaders were killed and captured during this time, Osama bin Laden managed to escape and, from a secret location, urged terrorists around the world to attack Western countries. The United States has been battling the Taliban and al-Qaeda sympathizers in Afghanistan ever since the invasion. It has turned into the longest shooting war in American history. On May 1st, 2011, nearly 10 years after the attacks, an elite U.S. counterterrorism team of Navy SEALs stormed the heavily fortified compound near Islamabad, Pakistan, and killed bin Laden, the most wanted man in the world. The team swooped into the compound in a daring nighttime helicopter raid, triggering a fierce 40-minute firefight that ended in bin Laden's death. The troops identified his body and then buried him at sea. Since September 11, 2001, life has changed but goes on. Security at airports and at public and private buildings and events has tightened considerably because of the 9/11 attacks. At the World Trade Center site, which became known as Ground Zero after the attack, the process of cleaning up the rubble and recovering human remains and personal items went on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 8 months. A new World Trade Center complex is now under construction. In 2006, a sleek 52-story office building was completed where 7 World Trade Center once stood. Scheduled for completion in 2013 is the 102-story One World Trade Center, which will soar to 1,776 feet, a height chosen to honor the year of America's independence. It will be about 400 feet taller than the Twin Towers. Several other buildings are being constructed, including the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. Damage to the Pentagon was cleared and repaired within 1 year of the attacks. The remodeled wedge contains the America's Heroes Memorial and a chapel at the spot where Flight 77 crashed into the building. Erected next to the Pentagon is a permanent outdoor memorial to the 184 people killed in the building. Near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the Flight 93 National Memorial Park and Tribute Center opened its doors in 2011 on the 10th anniversary of the attacks. September 11th, 2001 will forever be etched into the souls of Americans. It was a day bloodied by terror and tragedy, but it was also a day of courage and character. The minutes and hours immediately after the horrifying attacks saw unbelievable acts of bravery by first responders and ordinary citizens who rushed into harm's way to save countless lives. In one of history's most inhuman moments, it is the humanity of heroes that will forever be remembered.